warm, but at least that strong wind has eased down. Still fairly brisk winds across the northeast, still bringing some more showers here overnight. Again, wintry showers as well, with some sleet and snow, perhaps even down to low levels. So it could just turn a little icy. Elsewhere, though, it's a dry night with clear skies, and that is allowing the blue to take hold of the map. So it is going to be a frosty one tomorrow morning. Temperatures even in towns and cities close to or actually bang on freezing, and rural areas will be a little bit below. So yes, a cold start tomorrow yet again, but again the sun comes up, the frost will melt, and for most it's a fine day with decent spells of sunshine. Even the showers across northern Scotland tending to fade. We will see cloud increasing across the west, perhaps late in the day. Bit of rain just trickling into the west of Northern Ireland. But again, most places dry. Yes, it's still chilly for the time of year, but again, the winds will be light, getting that sunshine. It doesn't feel too bad. And if you're fed up with the cold, better news lies ahead, because these weather fronts moving in will bring cloud and showers next week, but they will also bring milder air, so turning a little warmer. Goodbye.
Join me, Darren Grimes, for Real Britain every Saturday and Sunday from 2 p.m. A news hour that comes with a trigger warning. Scorching hot opinion with prominent guests saying the unsayable, and a little bit of weekend fun thrown in. Unlike other broadcasters, I won't be forgetting what the B in our name stands for. So howie in for Real Britain Saturday and Sunday from 2 p.m.
Europe is in the grip of the most devastating humanitarian crisis since World War II.
The people of Ukraine are facing unimaginable suffering
as their homes are destroyed and their loved ones are killed.
Millions of people are being forced to flee for their lives, carrying only their children, their pets, and the clothes on their back.
The pain, loss and destruction grows by the day.
The people of Ukraine urgently need our help.
Already a vast humanitarian operation is underway. Britain's Disasters Emergency Committee, or DEC, brings together 15 leading aid charities to respond to overseas disasters quickly and efficiently. These charities include the British Red Cross, CARE, Oxfam, Save the Children, and World Vision.
Their teams are working on the ground in Ukraine and neighbouring countries to bring vital aid to those who need it most. If you can spare it, your gift to the DEC's humanitarian appeal will go a really long way.
£10 provides essential hygiene supplies for a person for a month.
£50 provides blankets for 4 families.
£100 provides emergency food for 2 families per month.
It's easy to give. You can donate online at dec.org.uk or call the 24-hour donation line on 0370 60 60 900. If you prefer to send a cheque, please post it to the Ukraine Humanitarian Appeal, PO Box 999, London, EC 3A 3AA. To give £10 on your mobile, simply text the word crisis to 70150. Standard network charges apply for calls, and you must be 16 or over. Texts are charged at the standard network rate, and your £10 donation will be added to your bill.
100% of your donation goes directly to the DEC to save lives and deliver critical support where it's needed.
Hello and welcome. I'm Alastair Stewart, and for the next 2 hours I'll be keeping you company on TV and radio with the stories that really matter across the country and indeed across the world. We've plenty coming up. We'll be reflecting on that big interview with the Prime Minister. Speaking exclusively to GBNews, he said that we need to make sure Putin fails in his attempt to conquer Ukraine. What does that actually mean, and what will it look like? I'm joined by expert guests to help unpack it all. So all of that to come, but first let's bring you right up to date with all of the news. Here's Simon Pusey.
Thanks, Alistair. It's just gone at 12 o'clock. I'm Simon Pusey in the GB newsroom. Latest British military intelligence shows that Russia continues to hit Ukrainian non-combatants such as civilians. It follows a Russian rocket strike on a train station in Kramatorsk in eastern Ukraine, which killed at least 52 people, including 5 children, and injured more than 100. The Ministry of Defence says Russia's ambitions to establish a land corridor between Crimea and the Donbass continue to be thwarted by Ukrainian resistance. Barrister Diana Wilson told GB News that the attack on the station is clearly a war crime.
Civilians are protected individuals, and the train station attack is, in my view, as somebody who's worked in the RAF and has experience of targeting law, clearly a war crime. It will be relatively easy for investigators to see what weapons were used, who had those weapons, and therefore, at least proving the war crimes is not likely to be impossible.
10 humanitarian corridors to evacuate people from Ukraine's besieged regions have been agreed. Ukrainian officials say the planned corridors include one from the city of Mariupol. However, the Luhansk governor asked for more evacuations as shelling has increased in recent days with the arrival of more Russian forces. He says 30% of people still remain in settlements across the region. The Chancellor's wife has said she will pay UK tax on all worldwide income. It's after it emerged that Rishi Sunak's multimillionaire wife, Akshata Murray, holds non-domicile status, which exempts her from paying tax on foreign income. It's as Rishi Sunak admitted to holding a US green card while in office. He said it was returned after he sought advice and that he followed all laws and paid full taxes. Boris Johnson says he was not placed on a ventilator when he was in hospital with coronavirus in 2020. Mr Johnson tested positive at the end of March 2 years ago and ended up spending 3 days in the intensive care unit. Speaking exclusively to GB News, the Prime Minister acknowledged that doctors struggled to raise his oxygen levels.
For some reason, they couldn't seem to get my oxygen levels to get up to the levels that they wanted. And you should be roughly sort of 94%. Or above 94% oxygenation of the blood, and I think when I went in, I was in the 80s somewhere.
Boris Johnson speaking with the Conservative MPs Esther McVeigh and Philip Davies there, and Alistair will have more in his programme on that exclusive interview. The Queen and other members of the royal family are expected to privately mark the first anniversary of the Duke of Edinburgh's death. He died on this day last year at Windsor Castle, just months short of his 100th birthday. His daughter, Princess Anne, will mark the day in Sydney as she begins her 3-day tour of Australia. A Dutch teenager who disappeared after going diving off the coast of Malaysia has died. That's according to his British father. Officials say 14-year-old Nathan Chesters has likely drifted into Indonesian waters. Chesters was reported missing on Wednesday afternoon, about an hour into a training dive with his father, a French woman and the Norwegian diving instructor. The 3 other divers were rescued hours after the initial missing report. Around 30,000 vulnerable patients in England with COVID-19 have been treated with the highly effective antiviral drugs. The NHS has branded the treatment cutting edge and says they improve symptoms within hours. Paxlovid was developed by Pfizer and in trials was found to have slashed hospital admissions and deaths by 88%. Labour is calling for the government to intervene at airports and ferry operators to avoid Easter travel chaos. Shadow Transport Secretary Louise Hay is urging ministers to prioritise Manchester Airport, where passengers are being asked to arrive 3 hours in advance to avoid missing their flight. And in Dover, over 2,000 lorries are in queues of up to 20 miles long, while ferry crossings are affected. Travel expert Simon Calder says after this weekend, it should be easier to get away.
And we've got about 15,000 people today so far who are not on the planes that they originally booked. Some of them, yes, would have been told about it in advance and made other arrangements. Others are just literally in the taxi going to the airport and they think, oh no.
And the chocolate firm Ferrero has issued a recall on all of its Kinder chocolate products manufactured at a site in Belgium amid salmonella fears. The company says it is suspending operations at its plant in Arlon, and it says will only reopen once certified by the authorities. The UK Health Security Agency said that 67 people are known to have been infected in the outbreak linked to the treats. This is GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens now. It's back to Alastair Stewart and friends.
Simon, thanks very much indeed. Coming up this afternoon on Alastair Stewart and Friends, Prime Minister Boris Johnson's told GB News that we must make sure Vladimir Putin fails in his bid to conquer Ukraine. Speaking exclusively to Tory MPs Philip Davis and Esther McVey, Boris Johnson said Ukraine was ready to fight until the end to repel Putin's attack. We'll be discussing that with expert guests. Plus, Extinction Rebellion begin what they claim will be their most disruptive protest yet across London, calling for an end to the use of fossil fuels. Well, GB News reporter Alice Porter will update us live this hour. And it's been a year since the Queen's beloved Prince Philip died. Her Majesty will be remembering the Prince privately today. We'll be speaking to Baroness Tanni Grey-Thompson, the chair of the Duke of Edinburgh's awards scheme, a little later. And as always, we really do want to hear from you on those subjects or anything else that you think we may have left off the agenda today. All you have to do is email me at gbviews@gbnews.uk. We are also on Twitter and on Facebook. And don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. That's GB News, TV and radio. So, Prime Minister Boris Johnson's told GB News that we have to make sure Vladimir Putin fails in his bid to conquer Ukraine. Speaking exclusively to Conservative MPs Philip Davis and Esther McVey, Boris Johnson told how Ukraine was ready to fight until the end to repel Putin's attack, while stating that engaging Russia in direct conflict, and I quote, would not be sensible. The Prime Minister detailed what Britain would be doing to help the Ukrainians fight back against Putin. He said, "We've got to make sure Putin fails in his catastrophic attempt to conquer, subdue, destroy another country, a neighbouring Slavic country." The Prime Minister also held important talks with the German Chancellor Olaf Scholz, in which both pledged to redouble their efforts to wean themselves off Russian energy, cripple the Russian economy, not least in any high-tech endeavours, in conjunction with the United States, Japan and South Korea. They also said it was, in effect, make your mind up time for China. Which side are you on? So, a new, more thoughtful phase in the fight against Putin, and perhaps even a new Boris Johnson. We'll be discussing that today with military and political commentators, business folk, and, as I said, we do genuinely want to hear from you. Email us your thoughts at gbviews@gbnews, tweet, go on Facebook, all the rest of it. We're on pretty well all of the social media websites. So, to get the conversation started, I'm delighted to say that with me now, live in the studio, is former Senior Military Intelligence Officer Philip Ingram, MBE, who's been on the programme before, as indeed has the political commentator and author Joanne Nadler. A very warm welcome to both of you. Philip, let me start off talking mainly about the Putin-Ukraine bit of what the Prime Minister had to say, not only in the interview with Esther and Philip, but also at that vital press conference with Scholz yesterday. More hardware, armoured trucks, top-level ground-to-air missiles, a new phase. Is that enough to bring defeat upon Putin?
It depends how we define defeat, and that's the difficulty there is here. I'd argue that Putin has already been defeated in achieving his original objectives. He hasn't toppled the government, he hasn't achieved any of the operational objectives he'd set so far, and he's now had to reset his forces to come round and meet what he's always said was his original objective, and just to properly capture the disputed Donbass region. There's the next big battle, and that's the bit that will decide whether Putin will be able to retain any part of Ukraine or whether the Ukrainians will push him out. And that's where this military build-up and providing more weapon systems and equipment into Ukraine is critical.
Did you see a different Boris Johnson yesterday, Joanne?
That's an intriguing question, Alistair, because I think Boris Johnson is a constant evolution, and to a certain extent, that's the basis of his success. That people are always trying to pin down. Well, is he a libertarian? Is he a conservative? Is he a social conservative? Exactly where does he lie on the spectrum? And it seems to me that he pulls out of the bag whatever he feels is necessary at any given moment. So, did we see a different Boris Johnson? I'm not sure that we did. I think his rhetoric on the Ukraine issue was very welcome and very strong. And yet we didn't hear a great deal from him, for instance, on why it is that it's taking so long to bring Ukrainian refugees to this country, despite the best efforts of many individuals.
I thought that was intriguing yesterday as well, because he kind of left it to the Home Secretary, Priti Patel, who in another interview pretty well apologised for it having been cack-handed.
Quite.
Is that buck passing, or is that actually getting the person who's in charge of it?
You know what? I don't think it desperately matters in the real world whether it's buck passing or not. I think people just want some answers. They want some practical solutions as to why this is taking so long. I mean, I sat in this chair, or a chair nearby here, a month or so ago and welcomed the initiative, but it doesn't seem to be working on the ground, and that seems to be a practical matter about the Home Office. Yes, so of course Priti Patel needs to respond to that, needs to answer what's happening, what's going wrong. Yeah. But even that doesn't, help those people who have got placements here, and for whatever reason, there's a huge delay in them actually being able to come.
Yeah, let's just 1 minute, Philip. Let's just run the pertinent clip, and then I'll come back to pick up on what Philip wants to say. Can we just run that bit?
British people have shown him amazing generosity, warm-heartedness. 200,000 homes, families open for Ukrainians to come here. What those women and children want is to be back in their own homes. And so to your first point, we've got to make sure that Putin fails in his catastrophic attempt to conquer, subdue, destroy another country, a neighbouring Slavic country. And the UK is not in the business of engaging itself or NATO in direct conflict with Russia. That would not be sensible. But what we can do is give them maximum economic, political, and military support to Ukrainians to defend themselves. And what this war has revealed is that Putin was fundamentally wrong in that bizarre essay that he wrote. He was fundamentally wrong. He said that Ukraine wasn't really a proper country and that it should be a part of Russia, essentially. That has proved to be the diametric opposite of the case. The Ukrainians love their country. They will fight to the end for their country. There is no way that Putin can now succeed.
As far as the military world and the military intelligence world is concerned, does it matter whether or not he's a credible philosopher king, as it were? Does it matter, as Joanne rightly points out, that on a crucial policy, as far as folk in the United Kingdom are concerned, I mean, they've given nearly £300 million to the DEC appeal. There are over 100,000 now saying, yeah, come and stay in my spare room and this, that and the other. Does that matter in terms of his perceived status as a leader militarily and in the intelligence community? From
an operational perspective, no. From a perspective inside Ukraine, no. He's seen as a bit of a hero figure inside Ukraine. But it's interesting, the politics across NATO, and this isn't particular for any one government. I've been in NATO through several different governments, and the UK is seen as a bureaucratic nightmare, an organisation, a country that provides process over anything else first and foremost, and is very slow at getting things done. However, where we are proactive, and we're proactive in supporting the Americans and helping provide intelligence into Ukraine, we were proactive in helping to arm the Ukrainians before Putin came in and train the Ukrainian military in using the NLAW weapon and other weapon systems as well. So it's a bit of both.
Yeah, I mean, that's an intriguing point and builds perfectly upon the one you were making earlier, because in a sense, if you're a Ukrainian who's been invaded by the Russian army, the bureaucracy, it doesn't matter unless it's stopping tanks, armoured personnel carriers and surface-to-air missiles getting there. I just wonder if that point he made, and our reporters who were on the Polish border echoed it completely, that most of the women and children coming out of Ukraine want to pitch their tents for a wee while and then get back in as soon as it's safe to do it.
Of course that's the case. In most situations where you have a refugee crisis, the majority of those people do want to go back to the country when it's safe for them to do so. But nevertheless, we have put in train a process here, or rather we thought we'd put it in train, but it doesn't actually seem to be manifesting itself. But of course, I agree with Philip that in the sense, does that matter to the morale of Ukrainians who are staying in Ukraine to fight? Not necessarily. And that's a slightly different point. And, you know, one can't take away from the fact that Boris Johnson has been very effective, it seems to me, in rallying support. But what wasn't touched upon in this interview, and I'd be fascinated to hear what Philip has to say, is behind the scenes, away from the kind of the language that has to be used publicly, you know, what now are people thinking is a sensible way to allow Putin to save a degree of face in this, if that is going to be the realistic way to bring this to some kind of closure?
A lot of public opinion would say he's not entitled even to any face saving, whether it's Donbass or the southeast of the country. And this point about public...
I don't think he's entitled to it, but, but that's a slightly different point.
But that may be a deal. And what people, greater minds than mine, and I try and read as much of it as possible, say, you know, when you look at something like the Vietnam conflict all those years ago, which were when we were growing up, as it were, Kissinger had to strike a deal with the commies. You had to buy a peace and you had to give them something. In the case of Vietnam, it was the entirety of the country.
And a deal was struck years ago whenever Finland had its conflict with Russia, and they lost a bit of territory and gave that up. I think if Putin had gone in to the Donbass region, first of all, and just tried to capture that, and then negotiated a deal and not carried out the atrocities that he has done against the civilian population, then the international community would have accepted a potential deal, and he'd probably got Crimea and everything else, as would probably the Ukrainian people. But I think now, with the horrors that he's committed, and the failures that he's had, I think Zelensky is in a position where I don't think his people would allow him to give a square metre of Ukrainian territory away. And even if he did, even if there was a deal, I don't think the international community could allow that to happen. So even if Zelensky came up with an agreement, I think Russia would still be under huge sanctions and everything else from the international community for the rest of any time it occupied even a tiny little bit of Ukraine. That's the horns of a dilemma. Putin can't lose.
And it's also a vital point in terms of public perception of Boris Johnson. You know, the bumbler, the someone who is not desperately familiar with the truth always, certainly not always with the detail. He can stand next to Schultz and say, you will wean yourself off Russian energy. We all need to do that together. And you need to stand foursquare with us and the Americans and the Japanese and the South Koreans in not letting them have any high-tech stuff, chips and the rest of it. And to look right into the lens, as I am now, and say to China, it's make your mind up time. That's not a guy who's in trouble fighting for his political survival.
But that's actually the critical point, isn't it? Because like so many issues globally now, it's actually China that is, if not pulling the strings, and in a position to do so. And you know, we can withdraw as much as we can from using Russian resources. But if they're going to be propped up by China, or if China's going to be effectively the main purchaser, then, you know, it doesn't really matter how much Boris Johnson appears strong in front of a camera. He still can't, you know, affect that huge global pull.
Yes. Well, Tom Tugendhat's on at the end of the programme, and you know perfectly well, and I think you do as well, that Tom is very, very strong on Chinese businesses getting involved in our infrastructure, whether it's nuclear power or communications. You wanted to come in on something?
Yeah, well, and you know, China thinks of things from a different perspective. You know, China's looking at this conflict in a different way to we are and to Russia is and all the rest of it. They're seeing economic long-term opportunism.
Right.
They can buy Russia. Effectively by doing that. And that's why they're hedging their bets politically. However, in a way, it helps us from an international community perspective, because they're a permanent member of the United Nations Security Council. They then, if they don't declare their hand, have a position to influence both sides. And it's using our diplomatic efforts to try and get them to do what we want, rather than respond to Putin's diplomatic efforts to get us to do what he wants. And that's the dilemma. And that's why we're going to see much more diplomatic toing and froing, I think, with China.
Yeah, it's a massive piece of statecraft that's required. And I think Boris Johnson has been pretty effective in bringing together that coalition.
Yes,
Did you think you would have been able to say that 2 years ago?
Well, I mean, I think, you know, Boris Johnson does have sort of certain skills. He is, contrary to what people necessarily paint him as, he can be, you know, quite an effective diplomat. Now, you're asking me that question, I guess, because of the fallout from Brexit.
Even by his own officials, he was judged one of the most inept foreign secretaries, and we all know about the Zaghari-Radcliffe episode. But it wasn't only that. He was not deemed a great foreign affairs man when he held the top job in foreign affairs.
I think that's right. And I think, but going back to the first question, when have we seen a change in Boris Johnson? I mean, I think the point about Boris Johnson is, does he apply himself? You know, he's more than capable. He's got quite an extraordinary brain, actually.
Yes.
The question is, how seriously does he take any given subject? Now, he has, you know, really embedded himself into this issue, and therefore we're seeing the best of him.
Yeah. He's also, in my personal opinion, the ultimate pragmatist.
Oh, quite.
Yeah. And in politics, whether you go back to Harold Wilson or wherever, sometimes that is the case. I only warned you of one question I'd ask you because, given what you used to do for a living, it's a delicate one.
It's okay, I know the others already.
So if I now get a flat bat, I'll completely understand it. Do the people that you still talk to in the upper echelons of the military and the intelligence community rate him?
Well, it's not just him, it's the whole of the higher level decision making. And I think actually what happened in Afghanistan and all the rest of it rocked people in the military, and they're trying to come to terms with what was a
because his government left people behind
which was a failure.
People relied upon.
And examining it back, every government there's been since we first went into Iraq and then into Afghanistan has failed, and senior commanders have failed at different levels. So that's caused an awful lot of soul searching, I think, amongst senior people, and they're trying to work this out. And then all of a sudden, right flank comes in, Putin attacking Ukraine.
It's an interesting distinction as well, isn't it? And I was reading another piece the other day that reminded people when Biden puts his foot in it, as far as the US military is concerned, he's still the commander-in-chief. Boris Johnson's not the commander-in-chief. Her Majesty the Queen is the commander-in-chief. And he's got a very effective defence secretary in Ben Wallace and an increasingly effective foreign secretary in Liz Truss. But he's the top name, he's the top guy.
He is, but the relationships that there are from the defence perspective, both at the military level, are very solid and will keep going, no matter who's in power politically. You can have a change of government and it's not going to change the way the military are working and interacting with each other. So the political oversight is important because the military are an arm of politics. It is diplomacy when it fails.
My dad, who was an officer in the Royal Air Force, telling me that, and he had his commission was framed and hung on his study wall. He said that commission is from Her Majesty the Queen, not from any Prime Minister of any persuasion. What does it tell us finally about Boris Johnson? You've been absolutely brilliant on the evolution and whether it's a flashpoint or not, and thank you for that. Couldn't have been clearer. For him to decide he's going to give an interview 2 years on from the start of the COVID crisis that nearly cost him his own life, and the content of the interview on that subject was quite interesting. But to select as the interviewers someone he sacked and someone who wrote one of the very first letters saying this guy's so dreadful he's got to go.
A brave man.
Well, yes.
There's another word some have suggested.
I mean, I think, that could be interpreted in a number of different ways, and I would imagine that some cynics and perhaps people who aren't natural friends of GBNews might say, well, he's being interviewed by two of his own colleagues. But I think it's always worth reflecting on the fact that sometimes when you have an interview which might be perceived as being less abrasive than certain types of political interviews, that it can actually end up being more revealing. And
well, you were sitting out in the coffee area, gripped by it.
Yeah, I think Boris enjoys sparring, so he's quite happy if someone comes in and will come at things from a different angle, because he likes a verbal fight. We see that at PMQs all the time.
Yeah. Nevertheless, I felt that on the day of the Grand National, it struck me that he's still effectively trying to ride several horses at once. I mean, he made some interesting noises about lockdown, but then when all is said and done, he came back and didn't say that he, to use a double negative, that he wouldn't do it again.
Final sporting analogy, and also on the day before the Australian Grand Prix, bit of a Lewis Hamilton there trying to get back in the running, having been seen off by Leclerc and Max Verstappen so far. Definitely back in the running. Definitely back in the running, not least because of the shenanigans this week about his perhaps nearest rival. Indeed so. Brilliant start. Thank you both very much indeed. I've asked you both if you'd be good enough to hang on, so we'll have another go at 1 o'clock, and we'll be joined then by Con Hochland, the great diplomatic editor of The Telegraph. So for now, Joanne and Philip, thank you both very much indeed.
Thank you.
You are watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and Friends, and we've lots more coming up on today's show, including Extinction Rebellion claiming that a protest today in London will be their most disruptive yet. as they call for the use of fossil fuels to end. GBNews London reporter Alice Porter will be joining us live from that protest. But first, let's take a look at the weather.
Looking ahead to this afternoon, and the UK is looking rather chilly with sunny spells and scattered showers, but wetter in northern Scotland. Let's take a look at the details. Much of southwest England will be dry with plenty of sunshine and with much lighter winds than yesterday. It should feel that bit warmer with a high of 11 degrees Celsius in Plymouth. There should also be plenty of dry weather for London and southeast England too, although a few showers cannot be ruled out. A sprinkling of showers across Wales this afternoon, mainly across the north and east of the country, with the best of the sunshine further south and west. Northwest England will also see a few showers, mostly feeding in from Liverpool Bay into Merseyside and Cheshire. It will still feel on the chilly side, even though the northwesterly wind will be that much lighter. Sunny spells for the afternoon across northeast England, but also one or two showers, but far fewer than yesterday. Still breezy, especially near the North Sea coasts, where temperatures will struggle to reach double figures. There should also be plenty of sunshine across central and southern Scotland, and with a bit of shelter from the breeze, it should feel okay in the sunshine. And for Northern Ireland, yes, there will be a few showers dotted about, but most places will have a dry and bright Saturday afternoon, if a little on the chilly side. Away from northern Scotland, showers will quickly fade this evening, with temperatures falling sharply after sunset, and that is how the weather is shaping up for the rest of the day.
Europe is in the grip of the most devastating humanitarian crisis since World War II.
The people of Ukraine are facing unimaginable suffering
as their homes are destroyed and their loved ones are killed.
Millions of people are being forced to flee for their lives, carrying only their children, their pets, and the clothes on their back.
The pain, loss and destruction grows by the day.
The people of Ukraine urgently need our help.
Already a vast humanitarian operation is underway. Britain's Disasters Emergency Committee, or DEC, brings together 15 leading aid charities to respond to overseas disasters quickly and efficiently. These charities include the British Red Cross, CARE, Oxfam, Save the Children, and World Vision.
Their teams are working on the ground in Ukraine and neighbouring countries to bring vital aid to those who need it most. If you can spare it, your gift to the DEC's humanitarian appeal will go a really long way.
£10 provides essential hygiene supplies for a person for a month.
£50 provides blankets for 4 families.
£100 provides emergency food for 2 families per month.
It's easy to give. You can donate online at dec.org.uk or call the 24-hour donation line on 0370 60 60 900. If you prefer to send a cheque, please post it to the Ukraine Humanitarian Appeal, PO Box 999, London, EC 3A 3AA. To give £10 on your mobile, simply text the word crisis to 70150. Standard network charges apply for calls, and you must be 16 or over. Texts are charged at the standard network rate, and your £10 donation will be added to your bill.
100% of your donation goes directly to the DEC to save lives and deliver critical support where it's needed.
Welcome back. It's 29 minutes past 12 and you're watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and Friends on GB News, TV and radio. Now, the environmental group Extinction Rebellion will begin launching daily protests in London starting today. Alice Porter is following the protests and joins us live now. There she is, wrapped up against the cold that was talked about in that weather forecast, but it's a lovely, bright day. Numbers assembling. Give us your estimate, Alice.
Hello there, good afternoon. I mean, I'd say there's a fair few thousand people here. The weather is lovely and it has a very jovial atmosphere, really, but for the activists here, there's a very, very serious message because, of course, they're here to campaign against reliance, they say, on fossil fuels in the UK. And I'm joined by former British Olympian Laura Baldwin. Thank you so much for joining me. Just tell me, how did you get from Laura was a professional sailor and now you're an activist with Extinction Rebellion? How does that happen?
Well, I learned about the climate crisis at the beginning of January 2019. My bubble of contentment literally burst in the moment that I read papers to my Canadian sailing friend who was attending the World Economic Forum. I flew over to Zurich for a weekend, you know, the sort of thing you do when you have no carbon conscience, because she was attending that forum. And I read these papers to her, and it was like reading a script for a horror movie. And from that moment, I looked at all the problems and also the solutions, learning as much as I possibly could. Made all the eco swaps myself, looked to help my community, so planting trees, making community food gardens. But the more I learned, the more I realised that it has to be government that acts on this, and I could see that they weren't. So I went along to a introductory talk for Extinction Rebellion and was sold into the movement. It just made sense what they were asking for.
Okay, so you feel very much sort of sold on it. What is happening this week in regards to Extinction Rebellion? I understand they're trying to get more people involved.
Yeah, so this week has been a massive week, and I couldn't feel more confident stood here talking to you today, because our demands at this rebellion are exactly the same as those demands of the United Nations and the International Energy Agency, and that is for no new fossil fuel investments, no new fossil fuel subsidies, and no new fossil fuel licenses. It just makes sense. We have this narrow window of opportunity to secure a livable future, and those are the words from the United Nations themselves, to say that unless we act now, we face an unlivable world. So it's extremely important. And then you have the very famous climate scientist, the NASA scientist, Peter Kalmus, who says we need 1 billion climate activists. And the United Nations Secretary General saying we need a grassroots movement that cannot be ignored. There is such power in protest.
I think a lot of people would understand there's power in protest, but a lot of people may be frustrated that there's going to be a lot of disruption in London today. I know you're going to be moving through the centre of London. We've seen with Extinction Rebellion, with Insulate Britain, a lot of disruption that's hurt ordinary people. Why should those people get caught up in today's protests?
So disruption is a really unfortunate side effect of direct action. There are hundreds of protests happening every day outside Parliament, but we never hear about them. The methods being used here, non-violent civil resistance, needs disruption to gain attention, to get the important messages across. So sincere apologies to anybody who is directly affected in this. But if you're worried about the climate crisis and you don't know what to do about it, come down and join us here today. The vibe is so uplifting, and it really gives you hope to feel that people coming together could actually have a chance to force the changes that are necessary to take effect.
Well, look, Laura Baldwin, thank you so much for joining me today. I'm going to be following this protest as it's going to be moving through the centre of London, but as I was saying there, I do warn there will be quite a lot of disruption for people in and around the area.
Yes, I'm not sure that unfortunate side effect sums it up as far as many people listening to the conversation are concerned. But Alice, thank you very much to you. Stick with it, and we'll come back and talk to you again later on as the day and indeed the afternoon unfolds, and through you, thanks to your guests as well. That was Alice Porter, our London reporter, live for us from those protests building up in Hyde Park. You're watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and Friends, and we have plenty more still to come this afternoon. Now, if I mention Rishi Sunak's name, you probably immediately think non-dom and higher taxes. But earlier this week, he donated £100,000 to his old private school, Winchester College. We'll be discussing that next. But first, let's bring you right up to date with all of the news. Here's Simon Pusey.
Hello, it's 12:34. I'm Simon Pusey in the GB newsroom. Latest British military intelligence shows that Russia continues to hit Ukrainian non-combatants such as civilians. It follows a Russian rocket strike on a train station in Kramatorsk in eastern Ukraine, which killed at least 52 people, including 5 children, and injured more than 100. The Ministry of Defence says Russia's ambitions to establish a land corridor between Crimea and the Donbass continue to be thwarted by Ukrainian resistance. Trade unions are organising a protest today in solidarity with Ukraine, calling for the immediate withdrawal of Russian troops and a ceasefire. The demonstration in London will also demand that the government admits all refugees seeking to come to the UK without further delay. A march will be held from Hyde Park and finish outside Parliament. The Queen and other members of the royal family are expected to privately mark the first anniversary of the Duke of Edinburgh's death. He died on this day last year at Windsor Castle, just months short of his 100th birthday. His daughter, Princess Anne, will mark the day in Sydney as she begins her 3-day tour of Australia. A Dutch teenager who disappeared after going diving off the coast of Malaysia has died. That's according to his British father. Officials say 14-year-old Nathan Chester's likely drift into Indonesian waters. Chester's was reported missing on Wednesday afternoon, about an hour into a training dive with his father, a French woman and the Norwegian diving instructor. The 3 other divers were rescued hours after the initial missing report. And the chocolate firm Ferrero has issued a recall on all of its Kinder chocolate products manufactured at a site in Belgium, amid salmonella fears. The company says it is suspending operations at its plant in Arlen and will only reopen once certified by the authorities. The UK Health Secretary Agency said that 67 people are known to have been infected in the outbreak linked to the treats. TV, online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News. Don't go anywhere. Alastair Stewart and friends will be right back in just a moment.
Europe is in the grip of the most devastating humanitarian crisis since World War II.
The people of Ukraine are facing unimaginable suffering
as their homes are destroyed and their loved ones are killed.
Millions of people are being forced to flee for their lives, carrying only their children, their pets, and the clothes on their back.
The pain, loss and destruction grows by the day.
The people of Ukraine urgently need our help.
Already a vast humanitarian operation is underway. Britain's Disasters Emergency Committee, or DEC, brings together 15 leading aid charities to respond to overseas disasters quickly and efficiently. These charities include the British Red Cross, CARE, Oxfam, Save the Children and World Vision.
Their teams are working on the ground in Ukraine and neighbouring countries to bring vital aid to those who need it most. If you can spare it, your gift to the DEC's humanitarian appeal will go a really long way.
£10 provides essential hygiene supplies for a person for a month.
£50 provides blankets for 4 families.
£100 provides emergency food for 2 families per month.
It's easy to give. You can donate online at dec.org.uk or call the 24-hour donation line on 0370 60 60 900. If you prefer to send a cheque, please post it to the Ukraine Humanitarian Appeal, PO Box 999, London, EC 3A 3AA. To give £10 on your mobile, simply text the word crisis to 70150. Standard network charges apply for calls and you must be 16 or over. Texts are charged at the standard network rate and your £10 donation will be added to your bill.
100% of your donation goes directly to the DEC to save lives and deliver critical support where it's needed.
Welcome back. It's just coming up to 20 to 1 and you're watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and friends here on GB News TV and radio. Truth to tell, if you went down to the pub and mentioned Rishi Sunak, most people would think cost of living crisis, a couple who are richer than the Queen, a wife who looks like a hugely wealthy tax avoider and lots more besides. But midweek, and before green cards, non-dom status and all the rest of it engulfed the Chancellor, his wife and his number 11 Downing Street team, Rishi Sunak let it be known that he and his wife had donated £100,000 to his old school, Winchester College. Now, I declare an interest. My son Alex went to Winchester College as well. It is very expensive and it is only for the very brightest. They don't even do common entrance. They have their own specialist entrance exam. Well, I went online and celebrated this generosity as a firm believer in the choice that private education represents, and because I also think that philanthropy often does some stuff better than the state. It also saves taxpayers money. But the floodgates opened. He should have given it to state schools. It was more for the haves and not for the have-nots, and that would miss the point, in my humble opinion. Others, however, celebrated what he'd done to offer poorer kids a better chance. Let me give you an example. On this programme, every week, we encourage you at home to send your views, and we urge you never to hold back, and we do really read them out and care what you think. So my tweet was followed by rather a lot coming in from you, so I'm going to share some of it back. Sally tweeted to say, Boris had scholarships to go to Eton. Children of poor homes with ability were funded to go to Bristol Grammar School, a fine fee-paying school. But Gordon Brown scrapped that, and so children lost the opportunity. What Sally's referring to there is the assisted place scheme, which was a way of giving money so that kids who didn't automatically go because they were the son or daughter of the Duke of wherever it might be, it let them go into the private sector. Justine joined the argument. No, actually, I was one of those kids who was bright, came from a poor background, worked hard and still managed to get a university degree. I also served as a governor at a poor state school, and I watched bright kids, especially boys, get a poor education. And finally, this one from Steve. Parents are already paying for school twice, once through their taxes for state education and once through their income for private school. Why would they pay even more? So it was a very lively debate, all sorts of opinion, left, right and centre, which is what we love here at GB News. And I'm sorry if I started it, but I'm glad you joined in. Let me continue that conversation now by welcoming an old friend of mine and a real expert in this field. It's Lord Rafe Lucas, who's the editor-in-chief of the Good Schools Guide. And as I always say when he's on, he also takes the Tory whip in the House of Lords. We like to be very honest about those sorts of things. So reflecting on what Rishi Sunak and his wife did, Rafe, naive or a great gesture?
To give money to Winchester, I think it's a really important thing to do, to recognise how much you benefited from having an education like that and to want to share that strength with other people. I think it's a wholly admirable thing to do.
Yeah. Given that you edit a book that looks at all schools and some of the great schools and highest performing and best performing schools do come from the state sector as well, what is it, in your view, that people are specifically buying when they decide to scrimp and save and go down the private road?
I think these days it entirely depends on their particular children, whether their child is someone who will benefit from what each individual independent school offers. I mean, there are schools like Winchester which are for the seriously bright. I don't know if they still do it, but they used to play a game called Exam Chicken when they would sit in their GCSE maths exams and the person who started to write their answers first lost. And generally that was about 14 minutes before the end. So you've got to be seriously bright and independent-minded to do well at Winchester, but if you're that kind of kid, you're going to get the superb education there. There are other schools in the independent sector that suit completely different kinds of children. So it's, for most people, about getting the education that their child will benefit most from. Sometimes it's because of your particular circumstances. You may be very transient, you may have real difficulties at home, and there are some independent schools which go out of their way to offer places to children in care, for instance.
Well, interestingly,
different schools, different policies.
Yeah, absolutely. And I knew that about Winchester. I don't know about the Exam Chicken, but I'll check with Alex when I talk to him this evening. I do know that the only subject that he didn't get an A or an A star in was French, because he forgot that was the day of the exam. But that's not playing chicken. That's just not running your diary very well. A lot of people came online in that conversation I was having, was making the point about Eton and the fact that they build up bursaries. And of course, that's something that the Americans, particularly through their university, know all about. And it genuinely is the wealthy who've done well giving something back so that those who are bright enough to benefit from a great secondary or tertiary education can still get through to it. But I tell you what really knocked me over was the number of people who came onto my Twitter and Facebook feeds to say, you know, I'm not an aristocrat. I'm not some hugely successful former Goldman Sachs guy. Just a middle-class family living wherever it may be. We don't have holidays. We don't buy a new car every 3 years. We educate our children.
Absolutely. It's because people want their children to succeed in life and put their, as you say, their enjoyment of life second and their children first. And there's a lot of people like that, and that is the absolute backbone of the independent sector.
Rich people can clearly make a donation, like 100,000 or whatever it might be. Other people who are parents and have a secondary school in the state sector that they do not feel is delivering, what can they do? Because one of those tweets I read out before coming to my conversation with you, Rafe, was from a woman who said, I was even a school governor, but still I looked at boys particularly, and this is something that, as you know, Robert Halfon has done a lot of work on, white working class boys not doing as well as they ought to. What can and should parents do if they don't think they're getting value for their taxpayer pound?
The more parents involve themselves in schools, the better. I mean, a school with a really vibrant relationship with parents is a much better place than one where the children just get dropped off and that's the end of the relationship. And it does take time and it does take effort. But there are some wonderful schools in the state sector. And over the last 10 years, there's been less emphasis on bursaries and more on how can independent schools work with their neighbouring state schools to improve education for everybody. And in the areas where that's worked, like York or Eastbourne, that has been really successful.
Great to talk to you. And one fact we've talked about it in the past, but Alastair Campbell's wife, Fiona Miller, who's one of the great campaigners for state education, has always said one thing that state schools could learn from public schools and private schools is to celebrate their heroes, men and women, boys and girls who've done really, really well. So let's raise a glass to that. Rafe, always a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you very much
indeed.
And to you too. Lord Rafe Lucas there, the editor of the Good Schools Guide. Now, if you're planning on staying home this weekend, then it is an absolute monster of a sports weekend. I used to work with a lovely guy called Richard Frediani, who said one of the great tricks about sports journalism is that more often than not, the really good story is what comes through. So you've got the Golfing Masters, you've got the Grand National, you've got Premier League football, and of course you have Formula One. Who better to mull this all over than a sporting broadcaster and writer, Aidan McGee, a good chum of mine and who knows all sorts of stuff. I mean, that point about the best story wins, and you were telling me during the break about when you backed
Party politics.
Party politics in 92.
April the 4th, QPR, my team, lost away to Southampton that day, so it was quite a bad day anyway. And then later on, party politics came through. Just a few days before John Major won the general election of that year against the odds. I
was going to say against the odds.
It was predicted he would get a hung parliament probably, and then there was Neil Kinnock and the Sheffield rally just before that, which he didn't do his chance any good at all. He came across like a real prat, actually.
But we love the underdog, don't we? And we love the hero. And I was listening to you talking to Philip and Esther earlier on about the National and the first mayor and the first mother. We love that kind of twist.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I didn't think that Rachel Blackmore's achievement last year was celebrated as much as it should. I guess it was overtaken or overshadowed by the global situation we were engulfed in with COVID. We're in the midst of it this time last year.
Can I put my head above the parapet?
Go on then.
This may not play well, but I'll tell you what really annoyed me about that.
Go on.
Was that it was all about the first woman to win the Grand National.
Well, you know,
I love equestrian sport of all sort, and all I wanted to hear was the best jockey on the best horse won that day. And it happened to be her.
But it's still a story. You can't say it's not a story. Come on. I mean,
I long for the day when we don't.
I can believe
Formula One will be the next thing, I suppose. First woman to win.
Yeah, possibly, but I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I thought I wasn't even sure if they were allowed to compete in the national. I wasn't even sure about that. So to see that, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. So I thought it was a hell of a thing. She's racing again this year on Manila Times, and the mare thing as well. I mean, that's Snow Leopardess. She gave birth to a foal during a 2-year break from racing, and she's bidding to be the first mother to win the national. You could say she's had a mare in the last couple of years. So there's interest in there. 70,000 people going to be inside Aintree as well. The first one in 3 years. Betting shops are expected to take around £150 million. Now, that's interesting because you were able to bet last year through all the online mechanisms, but that number is expected to go up this time. COVID restrictions obviously restricted the event over the last few years, so you should see it somewhere back. So you can see the pictures there from a few years ago. You should see it somewhere back to full health. And my tip, if you're going to ask, I know you're going to ask.
No, I'm going to ask you.
Delta Work. You're seeing a better quality, a better class of horse win this race. If you look down the odds, Alistair, historically, I mean, I'm talking about party politics. Party politics won in 92.
Yeah.
At 15-1.
Absolutely.
Now,
well, that picture that you pointed out, people watching on telly obviously saw it, people on radio, it was just a lovely shot of 6 fantastic horses abreast racing. It's a cavalry charge, and an outsider, I'm not going to talk about Foynaven, but an outsider can win on the day at huge odds.
But you are seeing, the reason I'm going for Delta Work today is because you are seeing higher calibre horses win. And now we've seen too many times in the past the favourites fallen at the second. It's National Hunt. There's a little bit of a lottery, but I also think, given the stature of the race now, you're seeing the better quality horses coming through, the calibre horses.
Final question, and I did say you're the man who knows about all sorts of sport. I know nothing about golf at all, but even I know Tiger Woods. I mean, not only to make it to Atlanta, but also to make the cut.
Yeah, he did very well. I mean, he didn't shoot as well overnight as he did, or yesterday as he did the day before. He was 74 with 2 under par, so... 1 over par rather, so he's back a bit slightly. The other problem he's got is his compatriot Scotty Scheffler is in front, 5-shot lead. So that's this is to give you a context of just how far in front he is, because nobody since 1945 has ever relinquished that lead at the top. So he's in the driving seat there. Yeah. And when I say 1945, that's quite important, because I don't think records started before then, because it was the end of the Second World War. So that's how imperious he is at the front. However, he'll still look at this as there's a lot of golf still to play, don't get me wrong, but Tiger Woods will look like the comeback kid anyway if he really finishes somewhere near the top here. I mean, he's already got 5 Masters. He talked about the lack of pressure as well. He's done everything in the sport. Yeah. It's about pressure he's putting on himself. And the way he was talking on Tuesday, he said, I don't enter these tournaments unless I feel I can win. And there was an ominous stare in his eyes, as if he meant business. Yes. And I think even if it doesn't happen for him at this tournament, then I think the ones later in the year, other competitors around him, his fellow compatriots and even his contemporaries will look at him and think, well, you know what, I think this guy could be back. And his fitness is good. He nearly died, Alistair. We had to remember that. Yeah. And
that was the car tumbling off the highway in hospital into a ravine.
He was in bed for 3 months. And he thought he risked the possibility of amputation.
Aidan, always a pleasure. We shall choose our favourite to be watching.
Loads going on.
No choice. Good to see you, Aidan. Thank you very much indeed. You're watching and listening to Alastair Stewart, and indeed, friends, lots more still to come on the programme this afternoon. Today marks a year since Her Majesty the Queen's beloved husband Philip died. We'll be speaking to Baroness Tanny Gray-Thompson, the chair of the Duke of Edinburgh's award scheme next. But first, let's bring you up to date with the weather.
Looking ahead to this afternoon, and the UK is looking rather chilly with sunny spells and scattered showers, but wetter in northern Scotland. Let's take a look at the details. Much of southwest England will be dry with plenty of sunshine and with much lighter winds than yesterday. It should feel that bit warmer with a high of 11 degrees Celsius in Plymouth. There should also be plenty of dry weather for London and southeast England too, although a few showers cannot be ruled out. A sprinkling of showers across Wales this afternoon, mainly across the north and east of the country, with the best of the sunshine further south and west. Northwest England will also see a few showers, mostly feeding in from Liverpool Bay into Merseyside and Cheshire. It will still feel on the chilly side, even though the northwesterly wind will be that much lighter. Sunny spells for the afternoon across northeast England, but also 1 or 2 showers, but far fewer than yesterday. Still breezy, especially near the North Sea coasts, where temperatures will struggle to reach double figures. There should also be plenty of sunshine across the central and southern Scotland, and with a bit of shelter from the breeze, it should feel okay in the sunshine. And for Northern Ireland, yes, there will be a few showers dotted about, but most places will have a dry and bright Saturday afternoon, if a little on the chilly side. Away from northern Scotland, showers will quickly fade this evening, with temperatures falling sharply after sunset, and that is how the weather is shaping up for the rest of the day.
Europe is in the grip of the most devastating humanitarian crisis since World War II.
The people of Ukraine are facing unimaginable suffering
as their homes are destroyed and their loved ones are killed.
Millions of people are being forced to flee for their lives, carrying only their children, their pets, and the clothes on their back.
The pain, loss, and destruction grows by the day.
The people of Ukraine urgently need our help.
Already a vast humanitarian operation is underway. Britain's Disasters Emergency Committee, or DEC, brings together 15 leading aid charities to respond to overseas disasters quickly and efficiently. These charities include the British Red Cross, CARE, Oxfam, Save the Children, and World Vision.
Their teams are working on the ground in Ukraine and neighbouring countries to bring vital aid to those who need it most. If you can spare it, your gift to the DEC's humanitarian appeal will go a really long way.
£10 provides essential hygiene supplies for a person for a month.
£50 provides blankets for 4 families.
£100 provides emergency food for 2 families per month.
It's easy to give. You can donate online at dec.org.uk or call the 24-hour donation line on 0370 60 60 900. If you prefer to send a cheque, please post it to the Ukraine Humanitarian Appeal, PO Box 999, London, EC 3A 3AA. To give £10 on your mobile, simply text the word crisis to 70150. Standard network charges apply for calls and you must be 16 or over. Texts are charged at the standard network rate and your £10 donation will be added to your bill.
100% of your donation goes directly to the DEC to save lives and deliver critical support where it's needed.
Welcome back. It's just gone past 5 to 1, and you are watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and Friends here on GB News, TV and radio. As we've said a couple of times on the programme, and as we've had there in the news, it is a year since Prince Philip died. He's remembered for so many things, his wit, his passion for the environment, but perhaps more than anything, and across the generations, for his Duke of Edinburgh's award scheme. Every year, hundreds of young folk, probably thousands from all sorts of backgrounds, do the scheme. The outward bound bit is brilliant, the community work vital, and the friendships that are forged are truly lasting. Well, to reflect upon that, I'm delighted to be joined by a dear friend, one of the greatest ever Paralympians, Baroness Tanni Grey-Thompson, and there she is. Welcome to you. You became the chair of the Duke of Edinburgh Awards scheme back in July. You'd already been a trustee, yes, for 5 years?
Yeah, that's right, yeah.
Heck of a call even for someone like you to actually chair it.
Yeah, I mean, it's a big step up, and you look at the millions of people that have gone through the award, you know, how it's changed people's lives. It's an amazing thing to be part of. And I didn't actually do my awards, but I've got lots of family members and friends who did. So I saw the impact when I was a young person, and, you know, meeting the people who've been through it. And I think with, you know, the Duke's passing, we sort of understood. We had people who wrote to us who did the award sort of 60 years ago, who put a £1 coin in an envelope and said, can you please help the next generation of young people? And the award is life-changing for so many people because it pushes your boundaries in a way that other things don't.
I've been involved with it for a few years, and as you perfectly well know, probably twice a year, particularly when the Gold Awards are given, either at St James's Palace or, come the summer, sometimes in the gardens at Buckingham Palace as well. A number of people like me go along and help out. One of the things that's always struck me is not only the Earl and Countess of Wessex, and obviously he's been helping out for quite some time now, but the Princess Royal. I mean, you get a phenomenal cross-section of other members of the royal family turning up to do the honours.
You do, and the Earl is actually one of my trustees, which is amazing. His commitment to it is so strong, and you see him with young people in the same way that the Duke of Edinburgh was when he started talking to the young people, and he asked them, you know, what they got from the award, where did they go, what did they do. He absolutely cared about young people and what they got from it. And, you know, from the beginning, 6.5 million young people went through the award. You know, our ambition for the future is huge. We're looking for 1 million young people in the next 5 years. We already work with Young Offenders Institutes, and these are, you know, young people who've had a really, you know, tough time in life. Yes, they've made bad decisions, but also they haven't had the best start. And you talk to some of those young people it's the first time they've ever had a certificate. It's the first time they've been told they can do something. And it's actually a really important part of their rehabilitation. So if you were setting up an award from scratch, you'd kind of do the same thing. And that shows how far ahead he was in his thinking in terms of putting it together, because the volunteering, the physical, the expedition, we get a lot of feedback on the expedition. We really do. But actually, for some young people, it's the first time they've been on their own. And in terms of, the challenge of, wayfinding with a map, now you've got phones, it's some of that's a bit easier, but finding their way through difficult situations is what helps young people develop. And part of what we want to do is better explain the difference that it makes to young people.
If they can survive that going across North Wales on the back of a pony or down a choppy white water in a canoe, they can survive anything. Tanny, it's always a pleasure to see you, and thank you very much for sharing those reflections on the brilliant Duke of Edinburgh's Awards scheme, and long may it endure. Look forward to seeing you soon. Thank you very much indeed. The great Baroness Tanny Gray-Thompson there. You're watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and Friends here on GB News. We've plenty more still to come as we just drift past 1 minute past one. Please stay with us. Hello and welcome. If you've just joined us, the time is 1 minute past one. Hello and welcome back if you've been with us since 12 o'clock. Thank you very much indeed for so doing. I am Alastair Stewart and we are into the final hour of the programme. I'll be keeping you company on TV and on radio, and we've plenty more still to discuss, including more on our top story, that exclusive interview with the Prime Minister. Speaking to GB News, Boris Johnson said that Putin must fail in his attempt to conquer Ukraine. We'll be discussing that with our expert guests. But first, let's bring you right up to date with all of the news. Here's Simon Pusey.
Thanks, Alistair. It's 2 minutes past one. I'm Simon Pusey in the GB newsroom. Ukrainian officials have urged civilians in the eastern Luhansk region to flee as Russia is now amassing new forces. The governor there warned that Russia is preparing a new offence as shelling increases in recent days. Ukraine has increasingly been warning that Russia plans intensified attacks in the country's east and south after withdrawing its troops from areas to the north of the capital, Kyiv. Meanwhile, the latest British military intelligence shows that Russia continues to hit Ukrainian non-combatants such as civilians. It follows a Russian rocket strike on a train station in Kramatorsk in eastern Ukraine, which killed at least 52 people, including 5 children, and injuring more than 100. The Ministry of Defence says Russia's ambitions to establish a land corridor between Crimea and the Donbass continue to be thwarted by Ukrainian resistance. Barrister Diana Wilson told GB News that the attack on the station is clearly a war crime.
Civilians are protected individuals, and the train station attack is, in my view, as somebody who's worked in the RAF and has experience of targeting law, clearly a war crime. It will be relatively easy for investigators to see what weapons were used, who had those weapons, and therefore, at least proving the war crimes is not likely to be impossible.
Trade unions are holding a protest today in solidarity with Ukraine, calling for the immediate withdrawal of Russian troops and a ceasefire. We can go live to the protest now with GB News' London reporter Alice Porter. Alice, what's the scene like where you are?
Activists from all over the country have come down to London to protest over what they say is the climate emergency. They're calling on the government to stop any new fossil fuel use and to stop investment in fossil fuel companies. They were on Tower Bridge yesterday trying to cause disruption of people coming into the city. But it's very much here in the centre of London that they are causing chaos today. I'm right by Marble Arch, and they have been gathering in Hyde Park and are going to be moving through to Oxford Circus. And what I can understand is as they move through, they're going to be sitting down and causing disruption. They're saying they're going to be doing more road blockades than ever before, which is going to be causing a lot of problems for both drivers and pedestrians in the centre of London today.
Alice Porter, thank you very much indeed. The Chancellor's wife has said she will pay UK tax on all of her worldwide income. It's after it emerged that Rishi Sunak's multi-millionaire wife, Akshata Murray, holds non-domicile status, which exempts her from paying tax on foreign income. It's as Rishi Sunak admitted to holding a US green card while in office. He said it was returned after he sought guidance and that he followed all the laws and paid taxes in full. A Dutch teenager who disappeared after going diving off the coast of Malaysia has died. That's according to his British father. Officials say 14-year-old Nathan Chesters likely drifted into Indonesian waters. Chesters was reported missing on Wednesday afternoon, about an hour into a training dive with his father, a French woman, and their Norwegian diving instructor. The 3 other divers were rescued hours after the initial missing report. Labour is calling for the government to intervene at airports and ferry operators to avoid Easter travel chaos. Shadow Transport Secretary Louise Hay is urging ministers to prioritise Manchester Airport, where passengers are being asked to arrive 3 hours in advance to avoid missing their flight. And in Dover, over 2,000 lorries are in queues of up to 20 miles long, while ferry crossings are affected. And today's Grand National has all eyes on jockey Rachel Blackmore to retain her title. Riding Minella Times, who won last year's race, making her the first woman to win at Aintree, Blackmore will be keen to continue her success after winning the Gold Cup at Cheltenham a few weeks ago. Other favourites include Delta Work and Run Wild Fred. This is GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens now. It's back to Alastair Stewart and friends.
I wonder if they just put Run Wild Fred in there at the end there, because that's the one I'm backing. Fred happens to be the name of one of my sons, and it's a silly habit I have. There we are. Simon, thank you very much indeed for that. I am Alastair Stewart, and until 2 o'clock I'll be keeping you company along with friends and friendly guests. Still to come, Prime Minister Boris Johnson's told GB News that we must make sure that Vladimir Putin fails in his bid to conquer Ukraine. We'll continue that discussion on the exclusive interview with the Prime Minister. Are we looking at a new Boris Johnson? And April is the month of higher taxes and higher energy bills. The 1.25% national insurance rise has now kicked in. But how is it affecting those smaller businesses on the front line across the country? We'll be speaking to a butcher this hour who is now feeling the pinch. Plus, Sir Anthony Seldon and Tom Tugendhat MP will be here to give us the final word on that exclusive interview with the Prime Minister and what it tells us about him and the state of the government. GB News is all about you, our viewers, so any burning questions or stories that you think we need to cover, no matter how big or small they may appear, we genuinely want to hear them. To get your voice heard, email gbviews@gbnews.uk and do please put Alastair Stewart in the subject line. Well, as promised, I'm delighted to say that Joanne Nadler, political commentator and author, is still here in the studio, as indeed is Philip Ingram, former senior military intelligence officer. And joining us is a good friend of this programme, Con Coughlin, who is the defence editor at The Telegraph. Con, good of you to join us again and lovely to see you there. We were talking a little earlier on about what victory and what defeat might look like and the impact that it may have on the political profile of the Prime Minister. We may well come back to that depending on how the conversation goes. But my first question to you is what your view is of the balance internationally in the light of that United Nations Human Rights Council vote where Russia were voted off, but a number of people, not least Rory Stewart and also my old mate Robert Moore from ITN, North America correspondent, said, look at those who voted with Russia and look at those who abstained. What did it tell us about the balance internationally in all of this?
Well, Alistair, good to be with you again. I suppose the first thing I'd say is that the West, as we know it, is moving in the right direction. You get this sense that the Western democracies, countries that really are committed to freedom of speech and the rule of law and proper democracy, are coming together. You saw that with this deal earlier in the week, with Britain joining the US and Australia on developing a new generation of hypersonic missiles. These are steps in the right direction. And what happened at the UN this week is also a step in the right direction. And it's almost going back to what Donald Rumsfeld said after 9/11. You know, you're either with us or you're not. And I think that sense is developing. And I think the challenge is we don't really want a divided world. We want the globe generally to accept that what Russia is doing in Ukraine is vile and breaches every norm of international behaviour. So we want the Indians, we want the Chinese to recognize that this kind of behavior in the 21st century just cannot be tolerated. So, we're moving in the right direction, but we've still got a long way to go, I suppose, would be my summary.
So the point then of the Prime Minister specifically saying at the press conference with Olaf Scholz, the German Chancellor, eyeballing the lens and basically saying, China, it's make your mind up time. In your view, he was on the money with that challenge?
I do, and I think the Chinese are actually in a very difficult position. The relationship between China and Russia is a marriage of convenience. And your military guest in the studio there will know that last summer, the Chinese and the Russians did some joint military exercises, and the Russians came back complaining they'd been bullied by the Chinese. So, that's the dynamic between Russia and China on the ground. And I think in the broader sense, China's future, China's destiny is global trade. And to have global trade, you need to be able to deal with people. And if you're backing a psychopath like Mr. Putin, then people are going to shy away from doing trade with you because we've been through that with Russia. The argument was, and the German argument was, if we trade with them, it'll encourage good behaviour. Well, it didn't, and I think the Western powers are not going to want to do business with autocratic regimes that support Mr. Putin.
Consuming this on radio, we're just showing a picture of Vladimir Putin with his military advisors there in the Kremlin or whichever palace he's hiding in at the moment. Con's absolutely on the money on the shift in tectonic plates, isn't he? And is make your mind up, not just for China, it's make your mind up time for the world.
It is very much so. And it's interesting, a lot of the countries that abstained are reliant on Russia for food production. I saw some very good analysis on that. So they are suffering with, like the rest of us, with the effects on the global economy. And they're not in a position to absorb a lot of that. So that's probably why I think they abstained. But the Chinese piece, the Chinese economists advising Xi Jinping will be sitting there with their abacuses and working out whether they hedge the bets towards Russia and they're going to make more money in the long run, or to the West.
Risk what Deng Xiaoping achieved in China back in '78, and that is you can still have the Communist Party, but you can have free, profitable markets.
Exactly.
The other thing that grew out of that, and it struck me when I was reading about it at the time, because it's bang on the money for the domestic political agenda, is the number of people who said, well, if you can't back us in a United Nations vote, India, Pakistan and others, you jolly well won't get any aid from us either. That division plays to an important part of the domestic agenda as well, doesn't it?
It does, absolutely. But and as much as I agree with what Con said, I'm also slightly sceptical about what sanctions, and I don't mean in a literal sense, but kind of what penalties are we prepared to bring to bear to bring China around to this position? Because frankly, we're sitting in an economy where we've largely offshored all of our production capacity, all of our manufacturing capacity to China. So it's all very well to sit here and to say what I think is a laudable aim for the West. But, we have to be prepared to put into place quite a lot of big structural reforms in order to really have any, systematic change here.
Con, what's your view on that?
Well, I agree, actually. And I think if you look at the energy policy that was announced this week, I think the energy policy is informed by the very strong need for us to be self-sufficient in energy and not rely on other people. In the energy context, we're looking at Russia. But in the trade context, yes, I do. I think we have outsourced far too much of our technology. The fact that we couldn't just develop our own 5G network because we'd outsourced it all to China is a national scandal. Unfortunately, we woke up. I mean, I remember Jeremy Fleming, the head of GCHQ, telling me that we had nothing to worry about with Huawei. The fact that it was owned by the Chinese government didn't compromise our security. And 2 years later, we were scrambling to get rid of it. So, there's been a big wake-up call over the last few years, all round. And I think Joan's right. Trade is something we would have to look at very seriously. Particularly with high tech. Should China be building our nuclear power station? Should China be involved in any of our high-tech activities? I mean, these are big questions. And
sure, Con, I want to just bring Philip in on that, particularly on the Huawei and the intelligence. I mean, it's a fishing expedition.
It is, and the Chinese are playing a long game. They're working in multi-generations. So effectively, from an economic perspective, and therefore from a power perspective, they've bought the world. They own our electronic devices.
And also, they are bankers to the world.
Yeah.
I mean, you're absolutely right about economic sanctions. I mean, China simply says, OK, fine. You know, Prime Minister may be complaining this morning in the interview about, you know, we owe £83 billion at the moment, and the interest on what we owe is £83 billion a year. Let's go to China.
Yeah, well, I'm using the word sanction in the generic sense, not that I'm suggesting that we
trade, finance, all of the levers.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Yeah. I want to change the tack slightly because we've got about 7 or 8 minutes left. And one of the things that worried me slightly, Con, if I can bring you back in and then come to Joanne and Philip again in the studio. In the Prime Minister's interview, he said there will be no NATO direct involvement. And he was still adamant and absolutely firm upon that. And yet he talked yesterday about backfilling. That's his language. So if any former Warsaw Pact country, be it Bulgaria, Czechoslovakia and its tanks, or whomsoever, wants to lend kit and hardware to the Ukrainians, we will then say we'll have some of our kit and our hardware to make sure you haven't run out. I mean, that is direct NATO involvement. Is that mantra still credible?
Well, Alistair, there's a lot of sophistry going on with this, of what is involvement and what is not involvement. And I mean, I think the NATO leadership is very keen, and you heard Jens Stoltenberg talking about this in the week. You know, they feel that they've got a duty to avoid a starting World War III, and they also have a duty to support Ukraine. And that is the dilemma. And I think, you know, a lot of countries who are members of the NATO alliance want to provide direct military help, as we have done, to the Ukrainians. And then it becomes a question of degree. It becomes a debate about what is defensive and what is offensive weaponry. As President Zelensky made clear to the UN during the week, what he wants is heavy armour, and he wants warplanes, he wants tanks, he wants armoured personnel carriers. He wants to be able to take the fight to the Russians and drive them out of the country. But we are giving him weapons that basically allows him to defend his country, but not go on the offensive and recapture territory. And I think, you know, this debate is not going to go away.
No, it's not. Con, let me just explain that folk who are consuming your great thoughts and reflections on radio, just to explain to them that we're showing now what I think is Russian hardware rather than... Yes, it is. Yeah, Russian and a Russian head looking out of a turret there. But let me bring Philip back in on what you were just saying there. What I don't understand is Washington vetoed, I mean, it was in effect a veto, when the Polish government wanted its Air Force to give MiG-29s to the Ukrainian Air Force. The United States said, no, you can't do that. But Czechoslovakia's loading up the trains as we speak to send tanks in.
Yeah, and we've got a period of time between that. There's a very difficult political dilemma here, and the direct involvement...
Well, Con basically doesn't think it's credible.
It isn't, and it'll become less credible as things move on. However, we're in a position where the conflict is geographically bound inside the borders of Ukraine. And we're seeing millions of people being displaced, and we're seeing tens of thousands of civilians dying. If it breaks outside those borders, so we get directly involved, Russia knows that it cannot win conventionally, then that millions will be tens of millions. Those tens of thousands dying will be hundreds of thousands or millions dying. And that's what our politicians are looking at the moment.
And Putin is looking at the first United States president I can remember who ever talked about first strike, first use of nuclear weapons. Again, you know about all sorts of things, but you're an expert on the domestic political agenda. The greatest single weakness, potentially, for the Prime Minister, whether it's in the interview with Esther and Philip this morning, is that if he's saying stuff that isn't credible, and you've got the defence editor of The Telegraph and a former military intelligence analyst saying, look, if Johnson is telling us, you know, we will defend that line, but NATO won't get directly involved. If that ceases to be credible, everything else goes with it. That's a real danger.
A danger for him domestically, in terms of how he's perceived. I mean, yes. I mean that certainly applies, I think, to the sort of domestic situation and how he's perceived. Although obviously I do agree with Con that this is a very, very sensitive boundary to straddle, essentially. And it was, I mean, if you look at, it doesn't just apply to Boris Johnson in this country, but it also applies to any of the other NATO leaders in terms of what they're saying domestically and how they're seen. And I think that what the Czech Republic have done by directly supplying certain types of weapons is sort of slightly made it a kind of uncomfortable. It must be uncomfortable for other NATO leaders seeing that that's happening. And I can only presume that perhaps it's because they are a smaller country, they're closer by geographically, there might be that kind of line.
But if you're a former Warsaw Pact country, i.e. the Soviet Union's equivalent of NATO going way back to pre-1989, and you're running a government in Bulgaria, in Poland, in Czechoslovakia or the Czech Republic and the rest of it, you've got skin in the game.
Yeah,
do you remember what it was like? And if somebody wants, and you've heard what Zelensky himself said, if we, God forbid, fall, then next is Moldova, next is Georgia, next are the Baltic states. He sees the domino theory.
Exactly, and this is why the political situation will change and political decisions will change. There's an old saying that I love: if you never change your mind, why have one? So we shouldn't criticise our politicians for changing their minds as the situation changes. Yeah. That's really important, and it's important that they show the flexibility and they have the credibility to do that and get away with it.
Yes.
Con, let me bring you back in, and then I'll ask Joanne and Philip what they think about it as well. Almost as a throwaway line, you said that they are also desperate, whether it's Washington, London, Paris or wherever, to avoid the possibility of drifting in to a continental or a global war. And we all know from that brilliant musical, Oh, What a Lovely War, God forbid these things can happen by misjudgment, miscalculation, which is exactly what Philip and Joanne were just talking about. With a lifetime of experience of writing about these matters, how confident are you that certainly a continental war can be avoided and, God willing, global conflict?
Well, at the moment, I think we've made it quite clear to the Russians that the NATO alliance is very firm. I mean, I think one of the good things to come out of this whole tragedy is we've seen a resilience from the NATO alliance that I think a lot of people thought wasn't there anymore. And so there's a unity of purpose within NATO, and I think that message has got through to Moscow. Secondly, of course, the Russian military has performed appallingly and is in no position to threaten anybody else. I mean, they might be massing for an attack on the Donbass, but their ability to do anything else is pretty limited. Having said all that, we clearly have a deeply irrational person running the Kremlin. And so then you move into the laws of unintended, consequences, or almost a law of madness, because you just can't predict what Putin's going to do, and his ability to deliberately misinterpret what we do and present these false narratives is very dangerous. So I think at the moment we can hold the line, but when you're dealing with somebody as mad as Putin, there's always going to be uncertainty.
Penultimate word to Joanne.
Well, I think the madness of Putin also enables him to be sort of flexible in a very grim sense and to take the West by surprise. So absolutely, we have to face up to the fact that even 2 or 3 days before he invaded, many seasoned commentators were saying that just wasn't going to happen.
Were you pleased or surprised when he said at the Olaf Scholz press conference that he had not spoken to Putin since the night before the invasion, Boris Johnson?
No, I wasn't really, because I think that we've assessed that there are other global players that are playing that kind of role. And I think that it would perhaps have been more surprising if he had been directly in contact with him.
Yeah, because he can't be. I mean, he went on to say, because I simply don't believe a word that he says.
Yeah, quite.
Your final take on that brilliant summation there from Con about NATO is much stronger, and NATO is Jens Stoltenberg particularly, but all of the leaders say we are a bastion for peace. We are not a bastion for invasion and occupation. Do you go along with that as an analyst?
Very, very much so. Not only is NATO stronger, but the EU stronger, and the differences that there are politically from countries contributing this or not contributing that actually is one of the strengths of the organisation.
But Boris Johnson and the UK government have demonstrated very powerfully that you don't have to be in the EU to be an upfront leading player in NATO.
Oh, well, NATO has always been the military front. The EU has never been a military organisation. It's purely political and economic. NATO is that front that's been there since the end of the Second World War.
In your quiet moments, are you confident we can avoid continental war, God forbid, global war? God, I don't like it when you roll your eyes like that.
I'm confident that we are still a long way off that decision point, but we can't second guess what Vladimir Putin's going to do, and unfortunately, he's got the biggest say in this.
It was a great debate and a great conversation, and only one thing upon which you all agreed, and that is that we are dealing with an unpredictable and arguably deranged person. Philip Ingram, great to see you. Joanne Adler, always a pleasure. Welcome back anytime. Thank you very, very much indeed. And Con Cochran there, joining us from your study. Thank you for your thoughts as well. And do read Con's stuff online and in print on The Telegraph, a genuine, wise and well-informed source. To all of you, thank you very much indeed. We've plenty more still to come in the final half hour of Alastair Stewart and Friends after the break. We all knew that April would be a month full of tax rises and cost of living concerns, but how does it actually affect smaller businesses on the front line across the country? We'll be speaking to a butcher next. But first, let's bring you up to date with the weather.
Looking ahead to this afternoon, and the UK is looking rather chilly with sunny spells and scattered showers, but wetter in northern Scotland. Let's take a look at the details. Much of southwest England will be dry with plenty of sunshine and with much lighter winds than yesterday. It should feel that bit warmer with a high of 11 degrees Celsius in Plymouth. There should also be plenty of dry weather for London and southeast England too, although a few showers cannot be ruled out. A sprinkling of showers across Wales this afternoon, mainly across the north and east of the country, with the best of the sunshine further south and west. Northwest England will also see a few showers, mostly feeding in from Liverpool Bay into Merseyside and Cheshire. It will still feel on the chilly side, even though the northwesterly wind will be that much lighter. Sunny spells for the afternoon across northeast England, but also one or two showers, but far fewer than yesterday. Still breezy, especially near the North Sea coasts, where temperatures will struggle to reach double figures. There should also be plenty of sunshine across the central and southern Scotland, and with a bit of shelter from the breeze, it should feel okay in the sunshine. And for Northern Ireland, yes, there will be a few showers dotted about, but most places will have a dry and bright Saturday afternoon, if a little on the chilly side. Away from northern Scotland, showers will quickly fade this evening, with temperatures falling sharply after sunset, and that is how the weather is shaping up for the rest of the day.
Europe is in the grip of the most devastating humanitarian crisis since World War II.
The people of Ukraine are facing unimaginable suffering
as their homes are destroyed and their loved ones are killed.
Millions of people are being forced to flee for their lives, carrying only their children, their pets, and the clothes on their back.
The pain, loss and destruction grows by the day.
The people of Ukraine urgently need our help.
Already a vast humanitarian operation is underway. Britain's Disasters Emergency Committee, or DEC, brings together 15 leading aid charities to respond to overseas disasters quickly and efficiently. These charities include the British Red Cross, CARE, Oxfam, Save the Children and World Vision.
Their teams are working on the ground in Ukraine and neighbouring countries to bring vital aid to those who need it most. If you can spare it, your gift to the DEC's humanitarian appeal will go a really long way.
£10 provides essential hygiene supplies for a person for a month.
£50 provides blankets for 4 families.
£100 provides emergency food for 2 families per month.
It's easy to give. You can donate online at dec.org.uk or call the 24-hour donation line on 0370 60 60 900. If you prefer to send a cheque, please post it to the Ukraine Humanitarian Appeal, PO Box 999, London, EC 3A 3AA. To give £10 on your mobile, simply text the word crisis to 70150. Standard network charges apply for calls and you must be 16 or over. Texts are charged at the standard network rate and your £10 donation will be added to your bill.
100% of your donation goes directly to the DEC to save lives and deliver critical support where it's needed.
Welcome back. It is just coming up to exactly 1:30, and you're watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and Friends here on GB News, TV and radio. National insurance hikes introduced by Boris Johnson's government will see Britons shoulder a cost of living blow not seen for decades. But how much will you take home after the national insurance rise has kicked in? And how will small businesses be affected by the hike? Because remember, it's not just us workers, it's also whoever is good enough to employ us has to take that hit as well. Therefore, I'm particularly pleased to be joined now by Mark Smith. Mark's the owner of Smiths and Ellis Limited, butchers in Tamworth, and there he sits in all of his glory with that lovely apron as well. So how much more are you now paying as an employer?
It's going to cost us about £500 to £600 per employee for each of our workers. When you consider that, when we've got to put that on top of what we need to keep our employees in step with national minimum wage increases, we have to increase to keep them above that, and retail price increases, it's going to have an impact of around about £5,000 to £6,000 per employee per annum. It's a huge increase.
Absolutely, and you've got 12 people that work for you, yeah?
12 across, yeah. We've got 2 different shops.
Yeah, sure. Do you know how much extra they're having to pay? And I'm intrigued to know, because I was briefed how you run your business and how close you are to it. You're not just a boss up there, but it's very much a personal thing as well and a family thing. Have they come to you and said, look, this is getting really tricky?
It's going to cost them. It's going to cost them a similar amount, £500 or £600 a year. That comes off what they're already earning, and when you compare that to what everything is costing them on a day-to-day basis, their fuel to get to work, their energy bills at home, everything that they buy, it really is the perfect storm, both for employees and employers.
And what are you hearing across the counter from the folk? Because you mentioned it in your first answer, that clearly it will have an impact because all of us are consumers first and foremost, unless we're buying pork chops or cider beef or whatever it might be, you don't have a business. And are people saying across the counter, look, this is going to be tricky, or are you getting fewer customers already?
We are starting to see impacts of that already. Naturally, as people have less available income to spend, they will look to take whatever shortcuts they can to maintain a standard of living that they've become accustomed to. And that may mean that they will buy less expensive items, or in many cases they will go for far cheaper alternatives like the discount superstores, who, whilst the quality is not the same, the bottom line is it may cost them less pounds per week to eat their home, get to work and back. So these are the options that they will take.
It's extraordinary. It's such a brilliant snapshot of real life. And my final question to you, Mark, is this, and it's genuinely not a trick question. I want to know what comes from the heart and the brain. We had the Prime Minister on GB News this morning, and on that very point, which Esther and Philip put to him about the cost of living crisis, he said, look, we can't just borrow money because somebody's got to pay it back one day and pay the interest on it. And secondly, we've got to get the NHS back in order and cut those waiting lists. So if he'd picked up the phone and said to you, Mark, I'll tell you why I'm doing it, and I'm sorry about the pain, do you buy that? Do you accept it? Or do you think that there must be a better way of doing it?
It's not a simple answer. Yes, I accept what we need to do. That there is no doubt that certain things need to be addressed. However, the reality of the way this is hitting certainly small retail businesses at the moment is that when we consider that the cost per employee is likely to be £5,000 or £6,000 per employee, and the cost of supply of our energy, our raw materials and doing business, it's probably going to put a lot of small retailers out of business. And when we consider that there are 5 or 6 million people employed by small retail businesses, that's going to have a significant bigger effect on the economy of the country, because all of those people will need to work, and if there is no available shop for them to work in, then it's another burden on our tax costs. So I understand what he's saying. He's absolutely right.
Yeah.
How do we fund that and pay for it? I really don't know.
And how's he going to feel when he starts reading about all those small businesses like yours, but God forbid it's yours, but other businesses that fold or decide that they can't take on that 13th, 14th, 15th employee? Mark Smith, real pleasure talking to you, and thank you very much for your time this Saturday afternoon. Best wishes to you and everybody else involved with Smiths and Ellis Limited Butchers there up in Tamworth. What a brilliant conversation with a guy who really knows what it's all about. You're watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and Friends. We've plenty more still to come in the final half hour of the programme. I'll be joined by the esteemed historian and political biographer Sir Anthony Selden and the chair of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee, Tom Tugendhat, to give us their final words on the Prime Minister, on Ukraine and on the state of the world that we are lucky enough to occupy. But first, let's bring you right up to date with the latest news. Here's Simon.
Thanks, Alistair. It's 1:35. I'm Simon Pusey in the GB newsroom. Ukrainian officials have urged civilians in the eastern Luhansk region to flee as Russia is amassing new forces. The governor there warned that Russia is preparing a new offence as shelling has increased in recent days. Ukraine has increasingly been warning that Russia plans intensified attacks in the country's east and south after withdrawing its troops from areas to the north of the capital, Kyiv. Labour says the Chancellor and his family have potentially saved tens of millions of pounds in taxes due to his wife's non-domicile status. The Chancellor's wife, Akshata Murthy, has said she will now pay UK tax on all her worldwide income despite the status exempting her from doing so. It's as Rishi Sunak admitted to holding a US green card while in office. A Dutch teenager who disappeared after going diving off the coast of Malaysia has died. That's according to his father. Officials say 14-year-old Nathan Chesters likely drifted into Indonesian waters. Chesters was reported missing on Wednesday afternoon, about an hour into a training dive with his father, a French woman and their Norwegian diving instructor. The 3 other divers were rescued hours after the initial missing report. And the chocolate firm Ferrero has issued a recall on all of its Kinder chocolate products manufactured at a site in Belgium amid salmonella fears. The company says it is suspending operations at its plant in Arlon and will only reopen once certified by the authorities. The UK Health Security Agency said that 67 people are known to have been infected in the outbreak linked to the treats. TV, online and DAB Plus radio, this is GB News. Don't go anywhere. Alistair Stewart will be back in just a few minutes.
Europe is in the grip of the most devastating humanitarian crisis since World War II.
The people of Ukraine are facing unimaginable suffering
as their homes are destroyed and their loved ones are killed.
Millions of people are being forced to flee for their lives, carrying only their children, their pets, and the clothes on their back.
The pain, loss and destruction grows by the day.
The people of Ukraine urgently need our help.
Already a vast humanitarian operation is underway. Britain's Disasters Emergency Committee, or DEC, brings together 15 leading aid charities to respond to overseas disasters quickly and efficiently. These charities include the British Red Cross, CARE, Oxfam, Save the Children and World Vision.
Their teams are working on the ground in Ukraine and neighbouring countries to bring vital aid to those who need it most. If you can spare it, your gift to the DEC's humanitarian appeal will go a really long way.
£10 provides essential hygiene supplies for a person for a month.
£50 provides blankets for 4 families.
£100 provides emergency food for 2 families per month.
It's easy to give. You can donate online at dec.org.uk or call the 24-hour donation line on 0370 60 60 900. If you prefer to send a cheque, please post it to the Ukraine Humanitarian Appeal, PO Box 999, London, EC 3A 3AA. To give £10 on your mobile, simply text the word crisis to 70150. Standard network charges apply for calls and you must be 16 or over. Texts are charged at the standard network rate and your £10 donation will be added to your bill.
100% of your donation goes directly to the DEC to save lives and deliver critical support where it's needed.
Welcome back. It's 20 minutes to 2. You're watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and Friends here on GB News and Radio. Prime Minister Boris Johnson's told GB News that we have to make sure that Vladimir Putin fails in his bid to conquer Ukraine. Speaking exclusively to GB News, Mr. Johnson said Ukraine was ready to fight until the end to repel Vladimir Putin's attack, while stating that engaging Russia in direct conflict would not be sensible. The Prime Minister detailed what Britain would be doing to help the Ukrainians fight back against Putin. The Prime Minister came across to me as a slightly different man to the bumbling former self that many have been critical of, perhaps even reinvented, a more serious, certainly a more direct and better briefed Boris Johnson. I'm delighted and deeply honoured now to be joined by historian and author of The Impossible Office, The History of the British Prime Minister, Sir Anthony Seldon. I'm particularly delighted because he's joining me now live from his honeymoon. And kind of you to break into that just to spend some time with us, and warmest congratulations to you and thank you for finding time. Anthony, can Prime Ministers reinvent themselves?
Well, Alistair, it's a great pleasure to be with you. I hope you can hear me well from, indeed, the honeymoon, and very nice to be with you, as always, on your programme. And reinventing yourself as a Prime Minister is a very, very hard thing to do, because the record of previous Prime Ministers shows that once a Prime Minister loses the confidence and trust of their cabinet, their party and the country, it's very hard to get that back. And yet, despite all or mostly all predictions, Boris Johnson does seem to be back in a much stronger position than almost anyone would have predicted, Alistair, just 6 weeks ago.
Yes. I think it's claimed that Napoleon said, "Give me lucky generals," although I think that's disputed by proper historians such as your good self. But certainly Boris Johnson appears at the moment to be blessed by unlucky generals, not least his neighbour in number 11 Downing Street. I mean, to put it quite brutally, what's happened to Rishi Sunak, be it right or wrong, could not have been better timed for Boris Johnson.
Yes, and indeed I'm not that far from Elba, where Napoleon spent part of his time. But he is completely right. Even Machiavelli said that politicians need luck. And I think Boris Johnson has been much luckier than many prime ministers. Alistair, he was lucky with Brexit, that his predecessor, Theresa May, for all her qualities and diligence and courage and command of detail, could not solve Brexit. And yet Boris Johnson, aided by Dominic Cummings and David Frost, his two key advisors on it, did solve Brexit. Then once that was over, along came the worst epidemic for 100 years, and he was able to do pretty well. Obviously, the jury's still out about COVID, but most people think that he has provided quite good leadership with the vaccines. And then when that was finishing, along came Vladimir Putin to rescue him from Partygate and all the trouble he was in. So, still, like Napoleon said, a lucky leader.
Yeah. Interestingly as well, and as I said in the introduction, you've written not only brilliant biographies of individual prime ministers, but also the textbook on the office of prime minister, in parallel with Ian Dale's rather excellent account, which is much more the individual personalities. Margaret Thatcher became deeply unpopular towards the end of the first 2 or 3 years of her office because Geoffrey Howe whacked taxes up in the same way that Rishi Sunak has whacked taxes up. But along came the Falklands and, as it were, saved his skin. Does the recovery of a troubled prime minister require conflict?
Yes, either conflict or an epidemic or a major economic crisis. So yes, Margaret Thatcher was at a very low ebb, but along came General Galtieri of Arginia and the Falklands War, at which Britain prevailed. Obviously different to Ukraine, but a crisis nevertheless. For Gordon Brown, his premiership was in a lot of trouble, and then along came the fiasco of the global financial crisis, a crisis at which he was very good, economics and finance. You're a lucky prime minister if your crisis lands in a field of expertise at which you have strengths. And Boris Johnson has great strengths at optimism, great strengths at talking to global leaders and communicating with the country. So to that extent, he has been a lucky prime minister in that he's managed to turn the difficulties, crises that defeated others on his watch of his premiership to his advantage. So I'm with you all the way on luck.
All right, Anthony, always a pleasure. And again, thanks for breaking into the honeymoon. Warmest congratulations from all of us to all of you, and look forward to seeing you when you're back in the UK. Thank you very much indeed. So Anthony Seldon there, political biographer, former master at Wellington College in Berkshire and also Brighton College, who is, sorry it was a bit windy, but we wanted to stick with it. I hope you were able to hear the bulk of what he said. Always worth listening to Anthony Seldon. As indeed is my final guest. I'm absolutely thrilled to bits that Tom Tugendhat has managed to fit us into his busy Saturday afternoon to give us his opinion on Boris Johnson's comments about Ukraine and perhaps more broadly. Tom is the chair of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee and, as you can see, joins me now. Really good to see you, Tom, and thank you very much indeed. Did the Prime Minister impress you?
It's not my honeymoon, I'm sorry, but...
Sorry?
It's not my honeymoon, so I haven't broken into anything quite so important.
Well, thank you for listening. He was fascinating, wasn't he? I mean, Seldon is always
He always is.
Yeah.
He's an exceptional individual, and he's got that thing that really good historians give you, which is the perspective, not of old storytelling, but the perspective to look at your current situation in context, so you can actually learn a little bit. And I think what he does is he always makes you think again about what you're seeing and questioning whether you're doing the right thing or the wrong thing, whether there's examples that can teach you how you should better respond. And I think that's what really good historians do. I mean, that's why I'm very pleased to follow him, actually. He's forced me to think again.
He's a good guy. I listened to the interview that the Prime Minister gave to Esther and Philip earlier on in great detail, but I also listened very carefully to Boris Johnson's performance in that joint press conference with Olaf Scholz, the German Chancellor, yesterday after their detailed talks. Tom, did the Prime Minister impress you with his detailed determination on arming and backing Ukraine to what he called the necessary victory?
Well, look, it's quite clear that the Prime Minister has really picked up his game on this. And I have to say, I thought Anthony Seldon's point about Prime Ministers reinventing themselves was interesting because, I mean, it's not an enormous secret to say that I have been critical of some of the Prime Minister's work in the last 5 years, particularly when he was Foreign Secretary. As you know, my job is to scrutinise and hold Foreign Secretaries to account. And I did that with him, and I've done that with 3 others as well. But I have to say, the response to Ukraine has been something that has impressed me. I think that the British government has done well, and clearly the leadership of the Prime Minister is important in that. And I think Ben Wallace has done well. So I think there's various elements that have come together. Look, I'd like it to go further. I mean, we've spoken in the past, Alistair, about areas where I'd like to see action quicker and harder. But I have to say, I think we're seeing a different kind of response to one that we've seen in recent years in recent areas.
You that one of those that was an immediate standout when I knew I was going to be talking to you was what the Prime Minister said about China, and I will come to that in just a moment because I know you've spoken at length about it and written at length about it. But just before we get to that, one other thing I wanted to ask you was whether or not you thought that Boris Johnson had got the, as it were, the geopolitics of all of this right. Con Coughlin, who I know you know well from The Telegraph, and also Philip Ingram, former military defence, military intelligence guy in the studio. Both of them had grave concerns that Johnson was saying, we can't let NATO be at war with Russia, but we'll backfill the Czechs if they want to lend tanks, we'll backfill the Bulgarians if they want to give heavy artillery pieces. It's a really thin line that Johnson's treading.
Yeah. It is a really thin line, and let's not pretend it's not. But I think there's still an important difference. And the important difference is at the moment, it is quite clear that it's Putin's army against the Ukrainian people. I mean, it's absolutely obvious that that's what's going on. As we equip and as we arm, that is what I'm afraid happened throughout the Cold War. We equipped and we armed each other's proxies against each other. We did so in Afghanistan most famously, but actually in other parts of the world as well. And we've seen that this is sort of, I mean, if you like, it's the established, it's the modus operandi, it's the established way that things have been done. And that's what we're continuing to do. Now, it is different to do that and to put troops in directly, because that would allow Russia, that would allow Putin to claim that this was a Russia versus NATO war. At the moment, it's very hard for him to make that claim because it blatantly isn't. What it blatantly is the Ukrainian people defending themselves, yes, with weapons and ammunition that come from Poland or Czech Republic or the UK or Sweden or various other places. Sweden, of course, importantly, not a NATO country. But it's not NATO against Russia. It's Putin against the Ukrainian people. And I think that is an important distinction. Yes, it's a fine one, but it is an important distinction.
And here's the other twist to that, which troubles me personally, and that is Con Coughlin was very clear saying, you've got to remember throughout all of this that you're basically dealing with a madman, a deluded guy, and Boris told Philip and Esther this morning in the interview as well that essay about Ukraine's not a real country was clearly a work of fiction from a madman as well. If that's the case, Tom, then he will clutch at excuses. He will clutch at lies to say, that's why I'm now launching tactical short-range weapons from Russia into Ukraine or, God forbid, beyond.
Well, it's certainly true that he's trying to write his own history. It's certainly true that he hasn't been challenged. I mean, I sort of question the fact that he's mad. I mean, he certainly lives in his own world and he's certainly constructing his own reality. But it's internally coherent, if you see what I mean. He genuinely believes that the Russian Empire was a good thing. I mean, I think nobody else does, but he genuinely believes that the Russian Empire was a good thing, that the Soviet Union was a force for good in his own world. I mean, this is a person who has an internally coherent logic, even if that logic, frankly, doesn't bear scrutiny. So I think that, we should be careful about saying that he's completely insane. What we should be doing is making sure that even under his own terms, even within his own logic, he can't claim the things that he wants to claim. And that's why I think this distinction does matter, because, when he was in the KGB, which he was service that he served for, 10, 20 years, a long time, the KGB were funding proxies in South America. They were supporting different armies in sub-Saharan Africa. They were doing many things that, they would argue were not state-on-state conflicts. And so, what we're doing is entirely in keeping with his own logic.
Final point as promised, and I've just been told we've literally got a minute left, so I'm going to give it all to you. I just thought Tugendhat's eyes will light up the minute Boris Johnson looked straight down the lens and said, China, it's make your mind up time.
He's right. He's absolutely right. Look, we've all got to make our minds up about the way we wish to see the world going. And frankly, for those of us who care about the petrol prices that we're seeing on the high street, or seeing the food prices rising, and the pressures that's putting on families in, the community I'm lucky enough to represent in Kent and the whole of the United Kingdom. The same is true in China. If you think that we're the only energy importers, look at China. If you think that we have enough problems with importing food, look at China. China has got a real choice to make at the moment, and the choice that they make will set them either on a path that will see their people and ours prosper and, see prices come down, see opportunities go up, or sadly, it will set us in a different path, and one that will see them fail and have severe consequences for us too.
Tom, always a pleasure. Thank you very much indeed for breaking into your afternoon. I know you've got constituency things to do and the family, so thank you. Always appreciate it. Welcome anytime.
Lovely to see you.
And you, sir. Tom Tugendhat, there, Member of Parliament and Chair of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee, with his thoughts on the Boris Johnson interview and the state of play in Ukraine. Let's get some of your thoughts, and you've been absolutely brilliant today. I'm going to start off with Daniel. I don't remember anyone questioning Tony Blair's wife's millions when he was Prime Minister, so why are you targeting the Chancellor? I wasn't, but I do take your point there. I was merely asking the questions. That's what I'm paid to do. Pete sent this message. Without an increase in fossil fuel outputs, some simply will not survive the next winter. That's the crisis that we're in right now. Renewables at 10% of electric supply will not cut it. Thanks, Pete, for that. Very profound. Philip joins the argument on Ukrainian refugee crisis. Why are we so obsessed with knocking the UK regarding visa requirements for accepting Ukrainians being allowed into the UK? 30,000 plus accepted is not that bad. They will be the first to moan when the unacceptable person gets in. That's the whole argument about checking and screening for security. Have I got time for one more? Yes? Oh, good. Oh, excellent. This is from Jill, and it's on China. Your guest, Con Coughlin, was spot on. We cannot take our eyes off China during the war in Ukraine. I hope very much indeed you heard what Tom Tugendhat just had to say. And final thought goes to John, and it's on Vladimir Putin. As an ex-soldier in the British Army, I and my veteran friends are horrified at the way Putin's soldiers are conducting themselves. If this continues, I reckon that Britain, along with the United States and allies, should move to Ukraine to help on the ground. Putin is a barbaric coward, and if threatened, he will back down. His own generals will remove him. From a former soldier, John. Great stuff. Thank you all very much indeed for those and the ones that we didn't have time for. It's 1:55. That's all the time we have today, but I will be back tomorrow at midday. I hope you'll join me then. Until then, a great afternoon to you. Bye-bye.
Looking ahead to this afternoon, and the UK is looking rather chilly with sunny spells and scattered showers, but wetter in northern Scotland. Let's take a look at the details. Much of southwest England will be dry with plenty of sunshine and with much lighter winds than yesterday. It should feel that bit warmer with a high of 11 degrees Celsius in Plymouth. There should also be plenty of dry weather for London and southeast England too, although a few showers cannot be ruled out. A sprinkling of showers across Wales this afternoon, mainly across the north and east of the country, with the best of the sunshine further south and west. Northwest England will also see a few showers, mostly feeding in from Liverpool Bay into Merseyside and Cheshire. It will still feel on the chilly side, even though the northwesterly wind will be that much lighter.